52-year-old has put herself as a major contender to succeed her husband, both as a party leader and head of state. Ndundu Sitole, SABC News, Johannesburg.
All right, then the big story this evening is that President Mugabe is about to make, or rather is expected to make, a very important announcement. Let's now dip back to the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation, and we're using their live feed. Remember that earlier on, when I spoke to Sophie Mkwena, our foreign desk editor, she said that the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation is the only medium and the only platform that will be disseminating and broadcasting live President Robert Mugabe's announcement that he will be making any minute from now. And she said that all the other media houses have been banned from State House. So basically, we'll be dipping into the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation's feed, and you know, we'll give you all the information and all the latest details as it happens. The breaking story this hour: President Robert Mugabe is expected to make a major announcement on his fate and his future. All right, President Mugabe has been Zimbabwe's president for 37 years. He's been leading ZANU-PF for much longer. Let's take a look at his political career.
Robert Mugabe was born on the 21st of February 1924. His birthplace was the rural Jesuit mission of Kutama at Zimba, about 90 kilometers west of Harare. Mugabe qualified as a teacher at the age of 17. He obtained the first of his many degrees from Fort Hare and UNISA in South Africa. After attending the late Kwame Nkrumah's Pan-African Congress in 1958, Mugabe taught for 2 years in Ghana. That's also where he met his first wife, the late Sally Hayfron. Back home, Mugabe rose to prominence as Secretary General of the Zimbabwe African National Union, or ZANU. The white minority government of the late Ian Smith arrested several liberation leaders in the early 1960s. Robert Mugabe was jailed for treason between 1964 and 1974. On his release, he joined Zimbabwe's freedom fighters in Mozambique. British mediated negotiations at Lancaster House in London in 1979 led to a peace agreement and new constitution which guaranteed minority rights. They culminated in elections for independent Zimbabwe in early 1980. ZANU emerged victorious and Robert Mugabe became Zimbabwe's first prime minister. He led Zimbabwe from the 18th April 1980 when Rhodesia gained independence from Britain. He initially offered an olive branch to the white minority and introduced much-needed social reforms. Zimbabwe's new leader was feted globally for his conciliatory stance towards his former enemies. A comprehensive social program was rolled out in Zimbabwe. It included free primary education and health care, as well as the expansion of roads, electricity, and telephone network. But it was also a time of tragedy. In 1982, Joshua Nkomo and his Zimbabwe African People's Union, or ZAPU, were accused of plotting a coup d'etat. Arms caches were found in Nkomo's stronghold of Matebeleland. Many suspected apartheid South Africa of fueling the ZAPU-ZANU rift. Mugabe unleashed his North Korean-trained 5th Brigade in Operation Kukurahundi, or Cleansing Rain. Thousands of Nkomo supporters and alleged dissidents were killed. Didimus Mutasa was a Mugabe loyalist. Robert Mugabe's reconciliatory efforts were challenged in 1985 when several white voters returned to Smith's Republican Front to Parliament. Following the so-called dissident period, ZANU and ZAPU signed a unity accord in 1987. It gave birth to ZANU-PF, established one-party rule in Zimbabwe, and resulted in Robert Mugabe becoming executive president with additional powers. In the early 1990s, Zimbabwe adopted the World Bank Structural Adjustment Program to modernize its economy. It entailed conditional funding for development. Within 5 years, though, the country faced mounting debt. In the late 1990s, Mugabe bowed to pressure from former freedom fighters to pay them millions, including monthly pensions.
You will be paid eventually. There is no reason for strikes. It's just that some don't appreciate that they have a government that has given them land, jobs, and well-being. They don't want to understand that we too, while fighting for our independence, worked for little monetary reward.
The deployment of about 40,000 Zimbabwean soldiers to the DRC drained Zimbabwe's coffers. It also experienced its most violent food droughts following price increases, especially for mealie. All of this led to an emergence of opposition movement for democratic change. The tightly contested March 2008 presidential and parliamentary elections marked a turning point in Zimbabwe's political landscape. Even though Mugabe remained president after 2 rounds of voting, he was forced into a SADC-facilitated power-sharing government with the MDC factions of Morgan Tsvangirai and Dr. Arthur Mutambara. But Mugabe's leadership was tarnished from the early 1980s by the Matabeleland massacres, land invasions of white-owned commercial farms, and Zimbabwe's subsequent economic collapse.
We have said, even as we acquire our land, we shall not deprive the white farmers of land completely. Every one of them is entitled to at least 1 farm, but they would want to continue to have more than 1 farm. More than 1 farm indeed. 15, 20, 35 farms, 1 person. These are not figures I am just getting out of my mind. They are real figures. So no farmer is being left without land.
The land invasions plunged Zimbabwe economy into free-for-all. The agricultural sector died. The Bretton Woods institutions stopped lending money to Zimbabwe when it couldn't honor its financial obligations.
The International Monetary Fund has never been a fund for the poor peasants seeking sustainable development. Even the United Nations, a body that is supposed to give us equal voices, remains unreformed. For these reasons, we join our brothers and sisters in the Third World in rejecting completely manipulative and intimidatory attempts by some countries and regional blocs that are bent on subordinating our sovereignty to their hegemonic ambitions and imperialist interests.
Prices skyrocketed. Shops ran out of stock. Government couldn't pay its workers. Typhoid and cholera broke out when basic services collapsed. Millions of Zimbabweans fled. When the Commonwealth suspended Zimbabwe, Mugabe simply withdrew his country's membership. Several industrialized nations, including the United States and United Kingdom, imposed sanctions on Mugabe and his inner circle. At the World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg in 2002, Mugabe was defiant.
Having and bearing sanctions banning us from Europe, we are not Europeans. We have not asked for any inch of Europe or any square inch of that territory. So, Blair, keep your England and let me keep my Zimbabwe.
A 4-year power-sharing deal between his party ZANU-PF and 2 factions of the opposition movement for democratic change from 2009 was rocky. But it culminated in a new constitution, an overwhelmingly election victory for Mugabe in 2013. Since then, he's consolidated power and purged some senior leaders for allegedly plotting to oust him. But many regard this as a strategy for Mugabe's wife Grace to succeed him. Mugabe intensified his drive to transfer more resources to Zimbabweans through a new indigenization policy. It's designed to increase black ownership of foreign firms to 51%. For some, this is a critical element of Robert Mugabe's legacy. Mugabe lambasted those he accused of trying to oust him. And in recent times, the veteran leader had this to say on his age and life.
He who made us, he who is creator of heaven and earth, I wouldn't be here. And happiness that is mine on this day as I count 93 years. Is a fortune.
And he also delivered this message to those who are calling on him to step down.
If I still have the energy and still have the life and the blessings of God, I'll continue. Journalists, tell those you are representing that the Robert Mugabe is still here, well and strong.
Well, perhaps Robert Mugabe will go down as one president who used to make the most outrageous yet the most profound of speeches. And all eyes are on Harare tonight, wherein he's expected to address the nation. Now, the veteran leader faces the apparent end of his 37-year rule. He was sacked earlier on today as ZANU-PF leader. The party gave him until noon tomorrow to step down as president of the country or face impeachment. And we'll certainly be dipping into the feed, into the live feed of the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation. And we do understand that it's the only platform and the only medium that will be, it is the only platform that will be, broadcasting the announcement by President Robert Mugabe. And me having conversed with Sophie Mkwena earlier on, she said that all other media houses were banned and it's only the ZABC who will be broadcasting. So we'll certainly be deeping into that once Mr. Mugabe takes that seat and makes that all-important statement. And Reuters is actually reporting that the Zimbabwe military is working on a resignation statement by Mugabe, but they did not give any details regarding that. So that statement has been worked on by the Zimbabwean military, and we'll certainly get more details on that. And standing by is Sports Live presenter Thabiso Sithole. Thabiso, and the expectation here is that once Emmerson Mnangagwa takes over Zimbabwe, he will certainly turn around the fortunes of Zimbabwe. Sanctions will be lifted, investors will be flocking back into Zimbabwe. But then, does he have the gravitas to do that?
Look, huge ramifications on whatever happens, and as far as the expected announcement of President Robert Mugabe stepping down. As you said, you've been reading out a couple of the things that have been happening so far. Picked up as well that the Presidential Guard are currently, outside the State House as well as Mugabe's residence. Basically, a lot of people assuming that the transition phase is actually underway. So at any given moment right now, we should get some sort of indication, as you see on television, Zimbabwean television, telling us that the President Mugabe will address the Zimbabwean people and the continent at large. All eyes, in fact, the world over, all eyes are on Zimbabwe right now to see exactly what's happening.
Yeah, and in speaking of all eyes being on Mugabe, just yesterday, the Botswana President Ian Khama did advise. He has actually been vociferous and been highly critical of Robert Mugabe's rule, saying that he should step down and he would not have regional backing and support if he doesn't step down. And it makes me wonder. Mugabe did not actually care about all the regional groupings or all the regional blocks that he was affiliated to.
It's a thin rope that SADC, in fact, in the African Union as a whole in the past couple of days have had to play, because one, do they justify the so-called coup, or do they, it's been a tough one. But look, it's all done and dusted, water on the bridge. Now we know what is expected unless something miraculous happens. But as you said, President Robert Mugabe is expected to step down, and we've seen in the past couple of days, whether it's in Pretoria, whether it's in the UK, whether it's in Australia, Zimbabweans as a whole seems to have accepted the fact that the rule of President Robert Mugabe is done and dusted.
And interestingly, Thabiso, I spoke to the ZANU-PF spokesperson here in Johannesburg and asked him if I was correct to say that, ZANU-PF are cowards, or not cowards to put it mildly, but then they are just a toothless dog. Why did they not fire Mugabe before the military stepped in?
One of two things. Mnangagwa, the very same person that they didn't want as vice president, as a party, they are now embracing him. So again, politics is politics.
True, politics is politics, my man.
And that's why you're going to do sports instead.
All right, what's happening in the sports list?
Yeah, thank you very much, Simpi. We're going to wrap that one, Simpi. I'm going to go straight down to Cape Town. In fact, this is somewhat of a live broadcast, somewhat of an important broadcast. The one is not planned. We'll go straight down to our Cape Town studios. We're expected to speak to a guest for tonight. In fact, it was supposed to be somewhat of a lovely sports live program tonight. We feature everything Team Dimension Data for Kobega. Remember, South Africa's, in fact, Africa's first pro team who were here in South Africa in their off-season a couple of days ago. I had the pleasure of joining them. I was down in Cape Town, where they did what they do best, hand over bikes, the charity Kobega. In fact, joining me right now, he's profiled as being in the top 4 of the Twitter influencer and cycling community. His name, well, in fact, he shot, I think Bradley Wiggins is onto a book. That's where he shot. And his name is Scott Mitchell. Joins us from Seapoint Studios. He's the official photographer for Team Dimension Data for Kobega. Scott, welcome to the show. It's a bit of a heavy one tonight. News breaking left, right and center. It's a bit of, a different sports live as you normally have. Thank you for joining us, Scott. How are you doing tonight, bro?
I'm really well, Tabasco, so it's really great to hear you.
Scott, let's start right there. We found ourselves on Thursday sitting under a picturesque mountain over a glass of wine, and we looked at everything and the mountains, and the first thing that came to your mind, geez, that's a beautiful picture. And that's when I picked up your photographer. You're a photographer for Team Dimension Data, to be exact.
Yeah, that's right. I've been the photographer for the team for the last year or so. And before that, I was working with another team for 4 years. Yeah,
speak to us. You went from, I think, Sky, was it, that you started off? Well, one of the bigger known teams as far as
I'm concerned. That's right, yeah.
Yes. How did it come about being a Team Dimension Data, Scott?
I really enjoy the team. It's been quite a change for me moving from Team Sky, and it's definitely got a more African flavour. It's a different sort of atmosphere. It feels kind of like an extended family to me, so I really enjoyed being at the team.
Life behind the lens following Team Dimension Data. I was with you again Thursday evening. We saw some of the pictures that you've been taking. In fact, my director tells me you're going to be putting some of those on the screen as we watch them. What is it like being a, photographer of probably one of the, well, it is one of the world's biggest teams, and as far as South Africans are concerned, what is it like living with those guys day in and day out?
It's a great experience because I'm really interested in documentary photography, interested in seeing what they do behind the scenes and try and give a slightly different perspective on what happens at the race. So it might be photographing a rider in his room or on the bus as he prepares for the race, and also stuff that happens afterwards, like the massage, team meetings, that sort of thing. So not just photographing them actually racing on their bikes.
I mean, one would always ask, as a photographer, is there your best picture, and as far as you've ever taken, or every day is one of those days where a new picture, and that's how it basically works. I mean, do you have a favorite as far as your life is concerned?
Well, it's pretty much what you say. It's like I tend to sort of fall in love with pictures and then immediately want to move on and take better pictures. So I do have favorites. Like at the moment, I took a really great portrait of Mark Cavendish the other day. So that's kind of my favorite at the moment, but I'm forever wanting to improve, so and you always kind of fall out of love with your pictures, and then you want to take better pictures. So.
In particular, with this team, I mean, again, when I was with you guys, the camaraderie in this team, it's almost a close-knit family. What is it about this team that drew you in, so to speak, to leave a big, one would say, probably one of the best or better teams in the world, Team Sky, to come and shoot for a tiny little Africa's team, so to speak?
Well, I think with my time at Team Sky, I really enjoyed it, but I really wanted a different challenge. I wanted to try something fresh and interesting. And I think with Dimension Data, because the charity's involved in the team, I also knew some of the riders and staff that were with the team, and I spent some time with them before I joined, and I felt it was something I could really be involved in. And also felt like I would have a lot of freedom to more or less photograph anything that took my interest, so I wasn't really given a brief. I was able to be as creative as I wanted to and go anywhere with the pictures. So it's actually been a real a breath of fresh air for me.
I think of some of the pictures as we're watching them right now on screen. Some of them were an auction on Thursday evening. Of course, in fact, the one we're watching now, Mark Cavendish's portrait, the one thing that I picked up everything you guys do is about the charity that Team Dimension Data supports, and you never forget that. It seems as if that's what you live for as the team, and that's what I think has probably made you such a tight-knit unit.
Yeah, I think the charity is a really important part of the team. I mean, we obviously ride to win bike races, and we want to be successful, all of us, the staff and the riders. But coming to this team, you have to believe in the charity and want to contribute to the charity. So I think it's what really makes the team a special team. It has a different approach. It's not just about succeeding on the bike. It's about also getting kids on these bicycles.
Speak to us now. And as far as I think you're jetting off tonight. You're off to the UK, some time off. Obviously, the season begins. Will we be seeing you in the Tour Down Under? Definitely yes.
Yeah, I think that would probably be my first race, and then it's a long old season starting in January and finishing in October. So, but because you're always travelling and you're abroad, there's a different flavour to the races, different landscapes, and although we're always doing the same sort of things, it's really interesting to photograph.
Well, tell you what, Scott, I'm going to let you go, Scott, because again, as we said earlier at the top of the show, that's the breaking news coming from Zimbabwe. Unfortunately, we're going to have to cut our interview short. I am going to touch base with you again a bit later. Scott, thank you very much for joining us. Have a safe flight over to the UK, and hopefully we catch up with you in as far as the Tour Down Under is concerned. Scott Mitchell speaking to us from our Sea Point studios. Unfortunately, we're going to have to cut that interview short. As we said, we're trying to get through as much news as possible, keeping an eye, of course, on what's going on in Zimbabwe. As I look on my right-hand side, we're still waiting for the President of Zimbabwe to update us on his resignation. But again, thank you very much, Scott Mitchell, for joining us from our Sea Point studios. Let's catch up now with some football news now. TP Mazembe, in fact, TP Mazembe beat SuperSport United by 2-1. This in the first semi-final of the African Champions League. In fact, African Confederations Cup. Let's take a quick look at how that match went.
Against Senegal, Ronald Williams was on the bench for both two. Great ball to Parla. Gets past Kasasula. Square ball! Oh, that should have been in the back. Great chance for SuperSport United. So we were mentioning that Mazembe were also in the Champions League at the start of this year. They lost to Caps United of Zimbabwe in the early rounds. Here's Williams, goal! He claims he didn't see it. It came through a wall of players. And it is Mazembe who take the early lead from Adama Traore. Space here from the youngster Mbule. Taking the place of Letsolonyane. He's going to go for goal! That is a magnificent shot! On his first game in African football, Sipho Mbule, 19 years old, bangs it in and silences the crowd. Quickly taken, chance, bobbling, Williams doesn't stop it! It's Mazembe who restore their lead. And it looks as if Daniel Ajay might have been the man who got the vital touch on that. Okay, trying to play it off to Krovla. Yeah, they come again. Mazembe through the middle. This could be a chance. Lovely challenge from Masha Maite. Asante is brought down. No penalty. Well, that is a let-off. That is a huge let-off.
Well, Simpiwe, as I said, it's somewhat of a topsy-turvy bulletin tonight because, as we did say to our viewers, we're keeping an eye, and of course, as far as the goings-on in Zimbabwe. Any expectations, I mean, there's been questions, rather, Simpiwe asked with the so-called military coup, that things will filter down to regression, or can Zimbabwe stand up and be counted and say, look, we'll hopefully have elections, 2018 or 2019, and move forward. Do you have any indication what Mnangagwa's
actually, as a matter of fact, the latest, the latest turn of events has been met with so much skepticism and pessimism from political thought leaders and political commentators, saying that the transfer of power will be within ZANU-PF, which is the interest of
which is a lot of people have been saying, is that is it worth it? Bring in basically somebody who's in the same mold in as far as Robert Mugabe is concerned. And especially since he's been a key ally of Robert Mugabe, they've been through together, he's a close personal friend, and he's also been implicated in the Matabeleland massacre, and the alternatives, though,
he's basically a carbon copy of Robert Mugabe.
The alternatives, though, are even
the jury is still out whether this will be the reincarnation of Robert Mugabe's rule in the form of Emmerson Mnangagwa.
The alternative, though, are pretty dire. You do not want to have a military-run government, so to speak, until an election, if I can put it that way, because one could say that in itself would be a turn for the worse as far as the state is concerned.
Sure. Yeah, that's it remains to be seen. It remains to be seen. All right, then. Earlier on, we spoke to the ZANU-PF spokesperson in South Africa, Kennedy Mandaza.
I cannot confirm it at the moment because I haven't received such information. I think it is still privy to those that were engaged in the discussions throughout the day.
So what's your reaction then to the appointment of Emmerson Mnangagwa as the interim party leader?
It has been the intention of the discourse that was taking place in the party from the defense forces intervened to make sure that there is a capable replacement of Comrade R.G. Mugabe when he steps down. And coming up with the name of Comrade Emmerson Mnangagwa is a tried and tested cadre who has been in the party for a very long time. And his ascension to this particular position doesn't come as a surprise to anyone in ZANU-PF.
So are you confident that Emmerson Mnangagwa will pull Zimbabwe out of the ditch that it found itself in?
We are quite confident as ZANU-PF that Emmerson Mnangagwa, Comrade Emmerson Mnangagwa, together with the collective that you will be working with, they will be able to pull through, pull up out of the doldrums that we find ourselves at the moment. Said it is the collective that Comrade Emmerson Mnangagwa will assemble that will work together to make sure that the glory days, the days that people will be back on track.
Emmerson Mnangagwa has been by Mugabe's side for the past 37 years of incumbency, and he's been Mugabe's close ally and personal friend for time immemorial. So what is it that he will do differently in order to change the fortunes of Zimbabwe around?
Like I've already indicated, he will be working with a collective. Many people that are capable, that if they are put together, they will be able to turn around the fortunes of Zimbabwe. But the other thing that we also need to note is that...
Well, the argument is Robert Mugabe himself worked with a collective, but then the economy crumbled right before his nose. I'm asking you, what is it that he will do differently?
Let us also note the fact that Zimbabwe has been under sanctions for a very long time. And the collective that was working around Comrade Robert Mugabe went through this particular period, which proved to be very difficult, over and above the sanctions that were imposed, which were illegal sanctions, which mitigated against the programs that they were trying to put in place, that brought us to where we are at the moment. And we are hoping that with the change of guard in terms of governance, the illegal sanctions will be removed because ordinarily they were targeted, and now that Comrade Mugabe is no longer in power, these we expect to be removed, and what we have not been benefiting of the sanctions will begin to flow in the country. And also, the confidence that is required by the country in order to come out of this situation will be gained as we move in a new dispensation where people are united and where people are beginning to are prepared to work together to take Zimbabwe out of this.
Now, I've been speaking to two analysts in this show a short while ago, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kennedy, that ZANU-PF is a toothless dog. Why did they not recall President Robert Mugabe before the army take over?
ZANU-PF is not a toothless dog at all. It has done what it has done at the moment following the dictates of the Constitution. Although the military had to come in order to solve the problem that was emerging as a result of the people that were now surrounding the president, including the First Lady Grace Mugabe, who had usurped the part of the powers of the president. And it is out of this recognition that ZANU-PF, if you read the statement, they've decided to expel Grace Mugabe from the party so that she is seen nowhere near the party. And in addition to that, They've also decided to expel all those that were in the G40, that were working against what we thought we needed to achieve as a country. That's why the military went in or came in to intervene. And primarily, they said they wanted to remove the criminal elements that were surrounding the president. And that is exactly what has happened. And we have now asserted ourselves by making sure that we give a rest to Comrade Mugabe as we move on with the work that the party is supposed to do in it.
Kennedy, I think you're running away from the real issue here. The issue is Zimbabwe crumbled right in front of Robert Mugabe with the support of ZANU-PF. And why did they see this coming? Why did they not take action then? Why did they have to wait for the army to take action before ZANU-PF now takes action against Robert Mugabe?
I've already indicated that the crumbling of the economy is not necessarily the doing of only the people that were running sanctions that are still there, illegally imposed, which restricted the investment and flows of capital in the government. We had this cabal that had now started to work against what the party wanted to achieve. I think you have seen a number of programs that the party has come up with, the command agriculture, which have turned around the economy. And we are hoping that with the current dispensation, we will be able to move the country forward.
One of the resolutions that were taken during the Central Committee, the ZANU-PF Central Committee crisis meeting a little earlier on today, was that all the expulsions were nullified. Does that mean that some of the party members who were expelled will be recalled back to ZANU-PF? And that includes Joyce Mujuru as well.
What the statement said is that all those that were expelled after the 2014 Congress, they will be allowed to come back to the party. And if Joyce Mujuru qualifies in that particular category, she is still welcome. But if she was expelled before the 2014 Congress, then it means she may not find herself in the party.
Well, that was my interview earlier on with the ZANU-PF spokesperson here in Johannesburg, Mr. Kennedy Mandaza. He's been reacting to the latest developments in Zimbabwe.
Question is, I mean, before we go to the next clip, in terms of the negotiations on the transition of power, do you have any idea what has been settled on, or maybe what could come out? Because a lot of people saying that Robert Mugabe, we all know, ICC, International Criminal Court, has had an interest in certain African leaders. Do you all know maybe the terms of agreement, if I can put it that way, Robert Mugabe leaving power?
Well, what we've gathered so far is that they wouldn't want to embarrass him because, you know, ZANU-PF is what it is today because of Robert Mugabe. Yeah. Zimbabwe is what it is today because of Robert Mugabe. So they just want discussing a dignified exit for him without litigation, without prosecution. They sort of will be, you know, brokering a deal to protect him from all litigation. Would
it be a case of then he keeps all his assets, as it were, in Zimbabwe? He keeps his homes, his family is taken care of. Do you have the nitty-gritties? Because I'm sure a lot of Zimbabweans out there and a lot of people as a whole could possibly be saying, well, why should he not be punished for what they deem probably he could have done to them or to the state?
Well, I guess the fact that he's been recalled is punishment enough for Mugabe. Remember that he's always been adamant that he will die as Zimbabwean president. He is Zimbabwe himself. So I guess that's the only punishment, the biggest punishment ever they could ever mate on him. So
strip him of what he holds dear.
Of presidential powers and of just being him, because Zimbabwe is Robert Mugabe is Zimbabwe. That's what he's always been saying. And well, not much detail have been coming forth regarding what will happen to his assets and his family, because, you know, the past 2 weeks have been very, very difficult, especially for all media houses and journalists. It's been very difficult to get the true details of what exactly is happening on the ground in Zimbabwe.
Just again, for our viewers watching, we know that it should be Sports Live as it were right now, but of course we're keeping an eye on the goings on in Zimbabwe. And I know for our viewers in Pure Sports Live, they were looking in particular to the profile that we had on Africa's Team Dimension Data, who we spoke to in Cape Town. In fact, Cape Town a couple of days, as you saw that interview we had on a short while ago. But we will keep that package going. It is an interesting one. It is for you, our viewers, so stay tuned. We'll try and flash it sometime later this evening. Whilst we're on the Zimbabwe issue, Zimbabwe President Robert Mugabe has until noon Monday to resign as head of state or face impeachment. The 93-year-old leader was sacked as leader of ZANU-PF at a special party meeting in Harare today. The announcement was met with wild cheers from party delegates.
Comrade R.G. Mugabe be and is hereby recalled from the position of President and First Secretary of ZANU-PF forthwith. Further, the resolution is that Comrade R.G. Mugabe should resign forthwith from his position as President and Head of State and Government of the Republic of Zimbabwe, and if a resignation has not been tendered by midday tomorrow, the 20th November 2017, the ZANU-PF Chief Whip is ordered to institute proceedings for the recall of the President in terms of Section 97 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe.
And in the midst of all this, one person has been missing in action. That's the First Lady, Grace Mugabe, and she's also been expelled for inciting hate speech. Her rival and ousted Vice President Emmerson Mnangagwa replaces Mugabe as the party's preferred candidate for next year's elections. At least 200 ZANU-PF delegates packed the party's headquarters in Harare to decide President Robert Mugabe's fate. The ailing leader's support crumbled fast in the days following the army takeover earlier this week. Mugabe was put under house arrest in response to his sacking of Mnangagwa.
Meanwhile, ZANU-PF has welcomed the reinstatement of former Vice Deputy President Emmerson Mnangagwa and his elevation to the position of leader of the Revolutionary Party.
In as much as this is said, it is historic that the party shall never again allow such undemocratic processes and procedures in the conduct of its business. The reinstatement of the Vice President and Second Secretary, Comrades Emmerson Mnangagwa, to his position in the government and the party is indeed a welcome resolution. The resolutions endorsed in this colleagues will no doubt reinvigorate and rejuvenate party making. It is stronger and united. Let's work together to shun regionalism, tribalism, and factionalism, so that the party is strengthened and united as we open a new page in the history of our revolution.
Well, Zimbabwean First Lady Grace Mugabe, who harbored ambitions of succeeding her husband, President Robert Mugabe, was expelled from ZANU-PF for inciting hate speech.
From Benoni to the Gracelands, the 52-year-old was born Grace Mufuru on the 23rd of July in the East Rand town. Her family lived here until 1970. In 1996, she married President Robert Mugabe in an extravagant wedding dubbed Wedding of the Century by the Zimbabwe press. At the time, he was 41 years older than her. Grace Mugabe was a secretary and typist to Mugabe before they were romantically involved, while both were allegedly still married to their spouses. Mugabe was married to his first wife, Sally, a Ghanaian who was much loved in Zimbabwe. Grace was married to Stanley Goreraza, a former intelligence officer in the country's Air Force. She and Mugabe had 3 children. Grace has been hailed for her charity work. In September 2014, she was awarded a PhD in sociology by the University of Zimbabwe. The awarding of the degree caused a lot of controversy. The thesis was not found in the university's library. Some claim she was registered at the university 2 months before being awarded the degree. In another scandal, she was implicated together with high-ranking Zimbabwean government officials on profiteering millions of dollars generated by illegally mining diamonds from the Chiadzo mine in eastern Zimbabwe. Grace Mugabe's fashion sense is loved by many in Zimbabwe. Her supporters applaud her fashion style, earning her the nickname of Gucci Grace, because of her appetite for extravagant shopping. She's famous for shopping in the fashion capitals of London, Milan, Paris and Singapore. In a 2013 interview with People of the South, Dali Tambo, Grace confessed that she likes her own designs, while her husband said he dressed himself. Grace lashed out at Joyce Mujuru's dress code. In October 2014, when Grace Mugabe returned home from a trip to the Vatican, she openly refused to shake former Deputy President Joyce Mujuru's hand. Grace accused Mujuru of plotting to oust President Mugabe. Grace Mugabe was chosen to lead the ruling party's powerful Women's League, ZANU-PF Women's League Secretary, a position that propelled her into the ZANU-PF supreme decision-making body, the Politburo. The position has enabled her to access ZANU-PF's inner circle and to play an active role in the battle to succeed her husband.
I think he is also my president. I love my president. I respect my president. I will help him to make this country prosper.
In November 2016, Grace Mugabe reportedly told the ruling ZANU-PF party's Women's League that she was already the president, as she plans and does everything with President Robert Mugabe. Another statement she made at the launch of ZANU-PF's official campaign for 2018 elections implied that Mugabe may rule from the grave. The 52-year-old has put herself as a major contender to succeed her husband, both as a party leader and head of state. Ndundu Sitole, SABC News, Johannesburg.
As we said, we continue with our live coverage looking into the goings-on. I don't want to call it a crisis in Zimbabwe. I think maybe the crisis is over, so to speak, with President Robert Mugabe.
Or has it just begun?
Well, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because you don't want to be a pessimist, as it were. You know, but as things stand, we're still waiting for the resignation, formal resignation and formal address from President Robert Mugabe, who's speaking to the people of Zimbabwe, South Africa, SADC, and the world at large, telling us basically of the pending resignation after he was recalled from the party.
Yeah, so all is set now, and earlier on we took a look at the visuals coming from the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation, and we saw a chair that is supposedly will be where Robert Mugabe will be making that statement, and it's all systems go with microphones and comms there on that particular chair, just waiting for Robert Mugabe to have a seat and make that all-important announcement.
As I look into the pictures on my right-hand side, it seems that there's still normal programming going on, but we'll keep an eye on that, so do stay with us right here on SABC News, Channel 404. We'll bring you the latest, and as far as the goings-on and the crisis in Zimbabwe is concerned, don't go anywhere. We'll have the latest right here.
We'll
take a
quick
break. Yeah. And once again, apologies to our viewers. We had to disrupt Sports Live for tonight as we bring you live pictures. These are from, in fact, these are pictures we're getting from Zimbabwe. As you can see, live pictures. Of course, the transition of power is expected to happen. President Robert Mugabe, as we see there in the pictures, expected to hand over power after being recalled from the seat as far as ZANU-PF is concerned, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe.
All right, and as you can see right now, he's been flanked by army generals, and the very same army generals who've instituted a military coup and took power away from him. And the military is actually a very, very important factor in every country, Tabiso, not just Zimbabwe, but military is a very, very important aspect.
Speaking of the military, we heard the MDC leader, Morgan Tsvangirai, during the week speaking of the fact that, in fact, it looks like we've got live audio now. Let's listen in. President Robert Mugabe.
I address you tonight on the back of a meeting I held today with the nation's Security Forces Command element. This meeting, which was facilitated by a mediating team led by Father Fidelis Mkonori S.J. of the Catholic Church, followed an operation mounted by the Zimbabwe Defense Forces in the week that has gone by, and which was triggered by concerns arising from their reading of the state of affairs in our country and in the ruling ZANU-PF party. Whatever the pros and cons of the way they went about registering those concerns, I, as the President of Zimbabwe and as their Commander-in-Chief, do acknowledge the issues they have drawn my attention to, and do believe that these were raised in the spirit of honesty and out of deep and patriotic concern for the stability of our nation and for the welfare of our people. As I address you, I'm also aware of a whole range of concerns which has come from you all as citizens of our great country, and who thus deserve our untrammeled attention. Today's meeting with the command element has underscored the need for us to collectively start processes that return our nation to normalcy, so all our people can go about their business unhindered in an environment of perfect peace and security, assured that law and order obtain and prevail as before, and endure well into the future. If there is any one observation we have made and drawn from events of the past week, it is the unshakable pedestal upon which rests our state of peace, law and order, amply indicating that as Zimbabweans, we are generally a peaceably disposed people, and with a givenness to expressing our grievances and to resolving our differences by ourselves, and with a level of dignity, discipline, and restraint so rare to many other nations. This is to be admired. Indeed, such traits must form the pith of our national character and personality. Yes, a veritable resource we summon and draw upon in times of vicissitudes. The operation I have alluded to did not amount to a threat to our well-cherished constitutional order, nor was it a challenge to my authority as head of state and government, not even as Commander-in-Chief of the Zimbabwe Defense Forces. To the man, the command element remained respectful and comported with the dictates and mores of constitutionalism. True, a few incidents may have occurred here and there, but these are being corrected. I'm happy that throughout the short period, the pillars of state remained functional. Even happier for me, and arising from today's meeting is a strong sense of collegiality and comradeship, now binding the various arms of our security establishment. This should redound to greater peace and offer an abiding sense of security in communities and in our entire nation. Among the issues discussed is that relating to our economy, which, as we all know, is going through a difficult patch. Our great concern to that guide the operations of all its organs. No, that jump. Of greater concern, may I read this again? I beg your pardon. Of greater concern to our commanders are the well-founded fears that the lack of unity and commonness of purpose in both party and government was translating into perceptions of inattentiveness to the economy. Open public spurts between high-ranking officials in the party and government, exacerbated by multiple conflicting messages from both the party and government, made the criticisms leveled against us inescapable. Amidst all this, flagship projects already adopted by government stood stalled or mired in needless controversies. All this now has to stop as we inaugurate a new work culture and pace which will show a strong sense of purpose and commitment to turning around our economy in terms of our policies. Zimbabwe's government remains committed to improving the social and material conditions of the people. Government will soon unveil an entrepreneurial skills and business development program which will empower and unleash gainful projects at our growth points and rural areas. Fellow Zimbabweans, we are a nation born out of a protracted struggle for national independence. Our roots lie in that epochal struggle whose goals and ideals must guide our present and structure our future. The tradition of resistance is our collective legacy, whose core tenets must be subscribed by all across generations and across times. Indeed, this too was a great concern for our commanders, who themselves were makers of that revolution, and often at very tender ages and at great personal peril. We still have in our various communities veterans of that founding struggle, who might have found the prevailing management of national and party issues quite alienating. This must be corrected without delay, including ensuring that these veterans continue to play central roles in the lives of our nation. We must all recognize that their participation in the war of liberation exacted lifelong costs, which, whilst hardly repayable, may still be assuaged and ameliorated. In respect of the party and the party issues raised both by the commanders and by the general membership of ZANU-PF, there too stand acknowledged. These two stand acknowledged. They have to be attended to with a great sense of urgency. However, I am aware that as a party of liberation, ZANU-PF has over the years written elaborate rules and procedures that guide the operations of all its organs and personnel. Indeed, the current criticism raised against the command element, raised against it by the command element and some of its members have arisen from a well-founded perception that the party was stretching or even failing in its own rules and procedures. The way forward, thus, cannot be based on swapping, vying cliques that ride roughshod over party rules and procedures. There has to be a net return to the guiding principles of our party as enshrined in its constitution, which must apply fairly and equitably in all situations and before all members. The era of victimization and arbitrary decisions must be put behind, so as we all embrace a new ethos predicated on the supreme law of our party and nourished by an abiding sense of camaraderie. To all this must be a general recognition that ZANU-PF ZANU-PF is a party of traditions and has been served by successive generations who are bound together by shared ideals and values which must continue to reign supreme in our nation. Hints of intergeneration conflict must be resolved through a harmonized melding of old established players as they embrace and welcome new rules, new ones through a well-defined sense of hierarchy and succession. Indeed, all these matters will be discussed and settled at the forthcoming Congress within the framework of a clear roadmap that seeks to resolve once and for all any omissions or contradictions that have affected our party negatively. The Congress is due in a few weeks from now. I will preside over its processes, which must not be prepossessed by any acts calculated to undermine it or to compromise the outcomes in the eyes of the public. As I conclude this address, I am aware that many developments have occurred in the party or have been championed and done by individuals in the name of the party. Given the failings of the past and the anger these might have triggered in some quarters, such developments are quite understandable. However, we cannot be guided by bitterness or vengefulness, both of which would not make us any better party members or any better Zimbabweans. Our hallowed policy of reconciliation, which we pronounced in 1980, and through which we reached out to those who had occupied and oppressed us for nearly a century, and those we had traded fire with in a bitter war, surely cannot be unavailable to our own, both in the party and in our nation. We must learn to forgive and resolve contradictions, real or perceived, in a comradely Zimbabwean spirit. I am confident that from tonight, our whole nation at all levels gets refocused as we put shoulder to the wheel amidst the promising agricultural season already upon us. Let us all move forward, reminding ourselves of our wartime mantra. Iweneni tinebasa. I thank you and good night. Sorry, one or two places I hope we can correct that. It's a long speech. Tatenda. Asante sana. Siyabonga. Okay, thanks.
That was an address to the nation by President Robert Mugabe at State House. Thank you for having joined us. Just leaves me to thank you for having joined us. From myself, Wadzanai Mombera, the entire technical and production crew. Will now take you back to our Pocket Hill studios, present viewing on ZBC TV.
Those are the live pictures. As you can see, the credits coming from the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation, ZBC, who bringing us these live pictures. Simpio, as we see President, well, I'm not quite sure whether to call him former President of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, because I think the words that most of us were waiting for was him, some sort of notification that he's stepping down. Maybe I missed it.
Yeah, I think I may have missed it too, because you know the general expectation was that he was indeed stepping down, and according to Reuters, who named a very reliable source within the ZANU-PF negotiation committee, did say in confidence that Robert Mugabe has agreed to step down tonight, the 19th of November 2017.
Yeah, and the stories, as you saw, we've been running throughout the evening as well, that if he doesn't step down, then impeachment processes. But that's what I think it's a bit. I'm not quite sure how to call this one so far. But maybe tell you what, Professor Dirk Coetzee has been following the events well as they're unfolding in Zimbabwe. Joins us right now via telephone line. Professor Coetzee, welcome to SABC News. I'm sure you are listening in on that speech. What is your take on what has just unfolded?
Yes, I'm also surprised, as you. I think it's almost an unreal experience that he continues to speak as if he's the president and really nothing has happened. I mean, one of the remarks he made towards the very end of the speech is of saying that he will preside over the conference of ZANU-PF in a few weeks' time. Now, what we've heard today at the Central Committee of ZANU-PF is that he was removed as the president of ZANU-PF, and some other members also, and that will be confirmed at or ratified at the ZANU-PF's Congress, Extraordinary Congress. But that does not mean that President Mugabe, therefore, can continue to be the president. My interpretation is that from today, in terms of, at least from the party's point of view, he's not anymore the ZANU-PF president.
So, Professor Dirk Coetzee, you're not speaking to Simpiwe. Since the ZANU-PF Central Committee decided earlier on today that if he doesn't step down tonight, then impeachment processes will then come in. So the whole transition or the whole coup has been quite peaceful at this stage. Are we likely to see blood being shed as a result of that impeachment process?
No, I don't think so. I think what is being done is that they have the initial action was taken by the military earlier this week, and now they are reverting to a more of a constitutional or a party political combined with a constitutional approach. And for today, for example, the focus was on ZANU-PF as the political party. And incidentally, this whole speech tonight of President Mugabe was only about ZANU-PF. He never referred to his role in government. And I think from tomorrow onwards, the focus will move over to Parliament, where the real decision, the impeachment decision, will be taken at the latest on Tuesday. So I think, as I understand it, they've given time to President Mugabe until noon tomorrow to resign, and if that doesn't happen, then the impeachment process will commence.
Prof. Tabiso speaking now. As we said, we did not hear the words being uttered that he's stepping down. What I did pick up, though, from the speech, as you rightfully said, he spoke of the divisiveness within the party. He spoke of, he was somewhat reconciliatory at one point. Then at one point, in a way, I think I heard him even saying he was not the best of leaders. You know, he did take some blame in this. What do you make of that? Is it maybe Mugabe toning down because he knows that, well, the party's over?
I think President Mugabe is such a politician that he understands the dynamics that's taking place at the moment. If you just looked at the screen, the TV screen, and saw on the one side the top command of the military, on the other side some of his government people or officials, then the mere fact that the military was still so prominent there, to some extent still reinforces the idea that the military is still in control of the situation. And that what they are just very sensitive for the matter, that it is not in the end understood and interpreted as essentially a military coup. I think what they try to achieve now is for President Mugabe to resign, that it goes either through the party systems as it has happened today, or through parliament. That will then, they will have the argument to say, but it is constitutional procedures that will follow. It is not a military intervention, and that will then conclude the process. But it is still, the military's presence is still very prominent, like we've seen just now. And I think they will continue to put a lot of pressure on President Mugabe, and that he won't be able to make a comeback. I think if we think back about a year or so ago, what happened in Turkey there with the failed coup, is that there the military did not sort of do what is being done now in Zimbabwe, and that is to make it almost impossible for a backlash or a comeback from the president's side. And I think this is what the military is going to continue doing, is to make it simply impossible for President Mugabe to make any moves. And that will ultimately push him into a position where we'll have to concede.
Now, Reuters news agency quoted an unnamed but very highly reliable source within ZANU-PF top brass and within the negotiation committee within ZANU-PF, and saying that the army was actually drafting Robert Mugabe's resignation letter. So, Professor, do you think what he was reading from was a resignation letter, or he just simply did not follow the script and was being his defiant self?
Well, if we looked at the reading of the speech, President Mugabe was very disorganized, and he was fumbling between some of the pages. And it's clearly that it wasn't a well-prepared speech. It was something which was done either in haste or it was not done by himself. We will, I think, over time now hear exactly who is the real or who was the author of this speech. But it appears to me at this stage, at some points of it was clearly under pressure. The concessions he made about the failures of government with respect to the economy, for example, the factionalism within ZANU-PF and the need to move beyond that. He referred to it as cliques. Now, that's the type of words that I don't think he will use himself. I would say it more or less comes from the military side. But I think what is, at this stage, he's still trying to see to what extent he can push the military. It's a type of brinkmanship that we are seeing at the moment. But at the same time, what we know is that 12 o'clock tomorrow is, in a sense, the deadline. If it moves beyond that, then ZANU-PF has another option available, and that is the impeachment one. But I think the first option that they wanted to see is if President Mugabe is not willing to resign on his own accord. If that doesn't happen, then I think the second option for them will be the parliamentary way of impeachment.
Prof. Kotse, we might just going to have to let you go in a short while, but just a quick one before we do. We were discussing amongst ourselves what could be the sticky points within probably Mr. Mugabe or President Mugabe finally signing on the dotted line. Is it a case of what is he getting out of it? Protection? Is not going to be incriminated, charges, etc., etc. What is your thoughts? What do you think could be the sticky points in as far as a negotiated settlement for his release be?
Well, I don't think what is in the pipeline is some form of prosecution for President Mugabe. First of all, he's too old. Most courts will say won't be fair anymore to prosecute him. So I don't think that is necessarily a sticking point. I think what it is about is what his immediate future will be, whether he will have to leave the country or not, whether there will be a secure exit for his family, all of them. Also, something which is not discussed yet, but now in many similar instances, there will be a quest by the income or the new government to try to recover a lot of the funds that have been accumulated by our outgoing president, that is regarded as a sort of unfair accumulation of money, of finances by him. And we know that the Mugabe family has lots of houses all over the world, including in South Africa. And I guess there's some aspects of that is to what extent the state will be able to reclaim money that they said actually belongs to the state. I think something else which might be is about, it's something which is not concrete, it's not tangible, and that is to what extent he will live in honor and with his legacy, according to him, intact and not being humiliated. And I think the main question that is now a point is, how is he going to exit without being seen to be pushed to resign? And I think what he tried tonight is to say, well, I'm still in control of the situation. I'm not going to announce my resignation under what is conceived to be pressure from the military specifically. So it's about, I think it's more about his honor than about specific material or other political aspects that is being negotiated at the moment.
Now, Professor, I think it's safe to say that President Robert Mugabe is now a lame duck president. I'm reading into the expulsion of him from ZANU-PF as party leader, and is now being technically the president of Zimbabwe. So, just how vulnerable is he at this point, given the fact that he's lost support within the war veterans, he's lost support within ZANU-PF, and he's lost support from all his key allies and comrades?
Yes, he is very vulnerable at this stage. I think we've also seen reports today that the different regions throughout the country have approved motions of no confidence in him. There's almost no support left for him within ZANU-PF. We all know about the decisions taken by the Central Committee today of ZANU-PF. So within ZANU-PF itself, there's almost no support left. All the support that could have been there, they have now been removed also with the expulsion of persons like Jonathan Moyo and others. The ZANU-PF youth wing have turned around radically now in favor of the military. So therefore there's absolutely no real support left in the party structures of ZANU-PF. What is left is only his constitutional powers as national president. And that is why the next target now is really to go through the parliamentary process with the impeachment.
Prof, here's a question then. Again, I'm going to go back to President Robert Mugabe. As we heard him, he spoke, the words he used, most importantly, I mean, we mentioned banning around the prospect of the army being involved. He did praise the army for the role they played in possibly fulfilling their constitutional duty or mandate, as it were. And with that, not, tearing down the country, not, what's the word I'm looking for, which you mentioned now, is the fact that they didn't disrespect him in the way that they treated him, basically saying he remained the commander-in-chief to this respect. There's still huge, Mugabe still got a huge following in Zimbabwe, and it seems that he's taking it in his stride with regards to how he was taken, well, off the seat of power. And again, I come back to the fact that we do not hear Robert Mugabe come outright and say he's resigned. Do we make too much into this, or is it semantics? We all know that he's gone.
I think it is now a question about how he's going to exit, and how he's going to exit with honor in his own view. That he is not treated the same way as President Mbeki, for example, here in South Africa was, which was a clear-cut just recall, and he had to resign under pressure. I think President Mugabe wants it in a more dignified manner, and that he is regarded still as the founding father of modern Zimbabwe. So I think that is the approach that he is following. So it is it's more of a gradual approach of exiting. While President Mbeki it was just one announcement, he resigned, and that was the end of it. So I think that is the main one. But if we look at the real power situation of President Mugabe, he has very little power left, political power. What is left is only his constitutional powers as president of the country, but without the political power, without the support of ZANU-PF as his main political constituency, he's exceptionally vulnerable, and there will be no way in which he can make a comeback. If the military was not the one who initiated this transition, he could have maybe still called on the military, but that option does not exist. This is the first one that actually disappeared for him. So in that sense, he is exceptionally isolated now in a political sense, and therefore it is simply a question of time of how he's going to exit.
Now, Prof, I may be wrong, but do correct me if I'm wrong, but the sole reason that the Zimbabwean military did not declare this a coup was to avoid triggering the country's automatic suspension from both the African Union and SADC. Now, we all know that the whole world, including these two bodies that I've just mentioned, have been closely watching President Mugabe's address. Are they likely to act after this?
I don't think they are going to act because nothing happened tonight which will confirm the idea that it is a sort of a military coup in its crudest sense. Now, what we are seeing is a way in which the military is putting a lot of pressure on President Mugabe in order to vacate his seat. And it is similar to what we've seen in some extent in other countries, like, for example, in 1997 in Turkey. They call it nowadays a post-modernist coup, where the military also put pressure on the prime minister to resign. On the other hand, there was another example in 2009 in Madagascar, where the military did the same, but it became a much more overt military initiative to pressurize President Ravalomanana to resign. Something similar happened in the Maldives in 2012. And then some people refer to Burkina Faso in 2014, where there was more of a popular uprising. And then some will say what happened in 2011 and 2013 in Egypt were more classic military coups, and the international community didn't respond to that, including the African Union. So it is not a clear-cut case that it will be immediately just regarded as a military coup, and therefore that they will be their membership will be suspended. So I think this is it's a very delicate situation, and the military tries to manage it in such a way that it is not a clear-cut case of a military coup.
Prof. Dirk Coetzee, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us as we get the news in. As we said, we're still not sure. We do not hear the words being uttered directly from President Robert Mugabe saying that he has stepped down. Right now, though, Prof, we're going to take some live. In fact, we're going to go live to our senior SABC News reporter, in fact, political editor, or foreign editor rather, Sophie Mkwena, who's out in Harare, Zimbabwe. Sophie, welcome to SABC News. The latest, and it's happening down there. We were speaking to Prof. Dirk Coetzee a short while ago. The words from the president of Zimbabwe did not come out of his mouth. We're still not sure what is the situation on the ground as you stand.
Well, a very, very, very quiet Harare. In the streets, it's quiet. Streets are deserted. I think people are disappointed. Many were expecting that President Robert Mugabe will announce his resignation. But I must say, I indicated earlier on that it is a statement and we can't predict what he is likely to say, but indeed the expectation was that he is going to announce his resignation. But President Robert Mugabe saying he is even going to preside over the coming ZANU-PF Congress on the 12th of December.
Question there, Ms. Sophie. How does President Mugabe say that's where he's going to decide when he's already been recalled as the party's president? How is that going to work?
Well, indeed, he can be recalled as the party president by the highest decision-making body, the Central Committee. But that recall has to be ratified by the Congress, and the Congress is going to take place on the 12th of November. Even earlier on, the Central Committee indicated that the Congress will ratify all the decisions the Central Committee took during the day. But let me indicate that when I spoke to Patrick Chinamasa, when I spoke to the Chief Whip, they indicated that if he doesn't make an announcement before end of business tomorrow, the parliamentary process is going to kick in. The parliamentary process, it entails the fact that they are going to pass a motion of no confidence on Tuesday. In other words, it will be tabled before Parliament. And thereafter, after voting, they feel very strong that they have numbers, and perhaps opposition parties are likely to join. They indicated that they believe they will get 90%. From there, they will move to the next stage.
Just quickly because you do, the story is...
The next step will be to appoint the committee that is going to look at this process, and thereafter they indicated that the latest Thursday, Friday, the parliamentary process will be concluded.
Sophie, sitting here in Johannesburg in these studios, with a question that comes in, you spoke of a quiet Harare. Is it a quiet because there's a bit of, intensity? Is there concern that things could turn otherwise since we do not, people were expecting Robert Mugabe to resign? Or is there a concern, a calm concern, and we Zimbabweans are taking it just as another day?
Well, I think it's a concern because after yesterday, people were hopeful that something will happen. But of course, President Mugabe, a shrewd politician, a veteran politician, has taken a decision not to make an announcement in line with what those who went out in the streets were calling for. That is his resignation. One can also perhaps think that perhaps there's atmosphere. The atmosphere currently is of fear. You know that now for those who went out to protest and who made all sorts of statements are asking themselves hard questions in terms of what is going to happen tomorrow. And I don't know, we'll see tomorrow whether people go back to the streets, but I am not, I don't think so. And for me, a way forward between now and tomorrow is to hear from the Defense Force Command.
Yeah. Sophie Mkwena, our foreign editor, speaking to us live from Harare. Thank you much indeed, Sophie. Be safe. We will be coming to you in and out as SABC News, carries on with this unraveling story, Zimbabwe as it were. Now going to bring matters back to our Auckland Park studios. Lulu Gabu is standing by. She's going to be speaking to our guest. Lulu, interesting, happenings out in Harare. We thought the president of Zimbabwe would be resigning. We heard the fact that, Sophie is saying right now, that has not happened. What